Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51% show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, how French women who are not in a relationship with a man are being forced to seek IVF treatment outside of the country. And is the age of 35 a fertility cliff? New American research is saying no. I'll be talking to researcher and author Dr. Lucy van der Wiel on what this means and also how egg freezing is becoming a growth industry. Plus, an exhibition at the Paris Pompidou Centre celebrates women artists in the abstract art movement. But we begin here in France, where making IVF fertility treatment available to single women and lesbian couples was one of President Macron's campaign promises. However, it is yet to become a reality, with the Senate having rejected the proposed legislation. Women wanting to undergo IVF but who are not in a relationship with a man must travel outside France, often at great financial expense to other European countries where treatment is available to all women. Claire Paquelin and Eleanor Vanel report.
T'as passé une bonne journée?
Oui, une très bonne journée.
It's always Isabel who picks up her daughter from school. Charlotte is 6 years old and doesn't have a dad. She was born through IVF treatment using donor sperm.
Yes. J'avais 38 ans. Je me suis retrouvée, après une rupture, à me poser des questions sur mon désir de maternité. J'avais très envie d'avoir un enfant. J'allais avoir le mur de l'horloge biologique qui allait bientôt arriver. Et j'ai fait ce choix de déconnecter mon désir d'enfant d'une relation amoureuse.
Isabel began researching in vitro fertilization, IVF. But under existing law in France, IVF is available only to women who are in a relationship with a man. So Isabel signed up with a clinic in Belgium. The travel and treatment cost 5,000 euros.
On réfléchit à tous les enjeux psychologiques, affectifs, financiers. La PMA, ce n'est pas un caprice, c'est des prises de sang, c'est des rendez-vous médicaux à 7 h du matin, c'est tout ce protocole médical qui fait que ça ne peut pas être un coup de tête. Si j'avais voulu faire un enfant sur un coup de tête, peut-être que j'aurais pu aussi coucher avec un homme et le faire sans son consentement.
Isabel talks openly with Charlotte about how she came into the world.
Parce que ça.
We meet another solo mum called Isabel too, and who's also 100% open with her 2-year-old daughter, Kalisa. For the 42-year-old, becoming pregnant was complex and expensive. It cost her 15,000 euros.
Qu'est-ce que tu fais?
Ça, c'est mon travail.
Ah, c'est ton travail, oui.
Isabel has a low ovarian reserve, so she underwent IVF treatment in Spain, in which a donor egg was fertilized with donor sperm. Double donation, as it's known, costs more money.
Quand j'étais enceinte de Kalisa, d'habitude, les gens ils se projettent un peu en imaginant la tête de papa, de maman, d'avoir un petit mélange. Alors, nous, c'est au moment de l'accouchement, c'est la surprise. Bon, il va avoir quelle tête? Hop, allez.
Isabel decided to go through a second round of IVF, using the egg and sperm from the same donors. She's 3 months pregnant with Kalisa's little brother or sister.
Et maman, qu'est-ce qu'elle a dans son ventre?
Le bébé.
Ah oui, j'ai une graine de bébé.
Every month, between 4 to 10 single women come to this gynecology clinic to ask about IVF, in the hope that French legislation will soon allow them to undergo treatment. Dr. Oliven is a fertility specialist who, for years, has been campaigning for IVF to be available for all women in France.
L'évolution de la loi, elle est très importante pour que ça mette fin à toutes ces pratiques borderline. Moi, j'ai vu il n'y a pas si longtemps, il y a 2 mois, une femme qui faisait des inséminations comme ça avec quelqu'un qu'elle avait trouvé sur Internet. Et je lui ai demandé, par exemple, si elle avait fait un test du sida pour cet homme. Elle ne l'avait même pas fait. Ces femmes, il y en aura toujours, elles se débrouilleront toujours pour avoir un enfant, y compris à contourner la loi. Donc autant le faire dans notre pays plutôt que favoriser les pratiques déviantes.
But even if IVF becomes legal for single women and lesbian couples, there's still the issue that sperm banks in France are struggling to meet demand. Already, heterosexual couples have to wait up to 2 years for donor sperm.
Now, as a growing number of women delay having children, the age of 35 has been treated by many as some sort of fertility cliff. Yet according to a new study published in the Journal of American Medical Association, the reproductive years for women in the States has now been increased from 35 to 37 years. And in the meantime, as more of us delay childbirth, a whole industry has sprung up promoting egg freezing among young women. Joining me now from Cambridge in the UK is Dr. Lucy van der Wiel, a research associate at the Reproductive Sociology Research Group at Cambridge University and author of Freezing Fertility. Lucy, thank you so much for your time. So with this new research, should we stop regarding the age of 35 as a fertility cliff?
So 35 is an age that has a lot of cultural meaning attached to it in relation to fertility. It is rather a gradual decline rather than a fertility cliff that it represents. So it's really important to not consider it as an age in which women are no longer fertile. The question of 35 is also very much not just a biological question, but a social question. It's linked to a history of being of concern around the biological clock. And that issue of the biological clock arose in the 1970s when women started participating in wage labor. And there was much more concern about whether fertility would be pushed out of the equation when women started working more. And that has kind of resurfaced with every new reproductive technology, whether it's egg donation or egg freezing or IVF. Concerns are raised again about when are women having children and what is going to be a normal reproductive age. But I think the key issue is here that we shouldn't think of fertility and female fertility only in terms of decline and failure, which is how it's often presented. But I think female fertility is something that we can be proud of. It's really amazing that some of us can grow new life and new beings into our bodies.
Now, Lucy, more and more countries are witnessing a drop in the number of births, even nations such as India and Mexico. As women gain increasing access to education and contraception, we're also seeing at the same time egg freezing being promoted as the go-to option for young women to ensure against infertility. But the reality is that it's only around 18% successful. In other words, the odds are not that good, are they?
That's correct. So it's very important when people consider egg freezing that they are aware of what the success rates are, both in general and for their fertility clinic. In general, IVF success rates aren't very high. Most people trying with IVF do not end up with a child. And with egg freezing, it's still a little bit lower than average IVF because the eggs have to survive the freezing and thawing rate. Indeed, it's about 18 or 20% of women who end up with a baby from the frozen eggs. And then there's only 5% of women who've so far returned to actually use those eggs. So although many women are freezing their eggs, so far not many children are being born from this procedure. So that's something important to keep in mind there.
So where does this leave governments, Lucy, when it comes to encouraging women to have children?
Yes, I think that's a very important question because we need to think about fertility as not only a biological or an individual issue, but it's also a social and a political issue. And especially when we look at changing demographic transitions, about declining birth rates, we see that governments respond to that in very politicized ways. You see, for example, that egg freezing is sometimes offered by governments who try to increase the birth rate. So certain areas in Japan, for example, have paid for women to freeze their eggs in the hope that they will then have more children. In other areas, IVF is promoted as a way of increasing the birth rate. And sometimes this is coupled to a nationalist or an anti-immigrant rhetoric. So we see that, for example, in Hungary, where Viktor Orban has taken fertility clinics under government control and is offering free IVF under the rubric of we don't want immigration, we want procreation. So we see that fertility and IVF is politicized in many different ways. And this is part of a broader history in which, for example, the right of women to end their pregnancies has been very politicized as well in relation to population politics and governments trying to increase the birth rates by disallowing women to make choices about whether they want to get pregnant and whether they want to end those pregnancies in case they do get pregnant. So I think it's really important that when we see these changing figures of fertility rates, that we look at what is happening with this politically and what does that mean for women's rights and women's autonomy over their own bodies and over their own reproductive decisions.
Lucy, thank you so much again. It's been great speaking to you.
And to you. Thank you, Annette.
And finally, a new exhibition at the Pompidou Centre here in Paris has placed female artists front and centre. Women in abstraction, focusing on the artists who've often been left out of art history books. Ellen Gainsford and Inez Olagare have this report.
Their names and faces aren't well known to the public, but all of these women played an important role in the history of abstract art. With its new exhibition, the Pompidou Centre is hoping to give them the recognition they deserve. Swedish artist Hilma af Klint, who worked at the start of the 20th century, was a pioneer of abstract painting.
It's a special case as she wasn't written out of history. She chose to be anonymous. She decided not to show her works. She broke with formal painting at the start of the century with the Swan series in 1915. And she played a key role in the birth of abstract art, a period that was very much linked to spiritualism.
At the start of the 20th century, due to the patriarchal society, many women didn't seek the same recognition as their male counterparts. Later on, several important women members of the movement found themselves overshadowed by their husbands, as was the case for Lee Krasner, the wife of Jackson Pollock, although the visibility of women artists also varied from country to country. Olga Rozanova was a figure from the Russian avant-garde.
She was an exceptional figure, a Russian artist who painted these pieces around 1916. You can immediately see from their powerful form and use of color that they were masterpieces of abstract art. She's a prime example of an artist who hasn't been given the place she deserves in the history of art taught in schools.
Some women did make it into the pages of art history books, like the Ukrainian artist Sonia Delaunay. But here, for the first time, she's exhibited with her maiden name, Sonia Delaunay Turk.
And that's it for now. You can also connect with us via our Facebook page, that of course being France24.51%, or do send us a tweet at _51%. So until our next show, bye for now.